There are nights when the castle is so still that I can hear the rain whispering against the windows of the dungeons. The world above sleeps, and even the portraits have grown tired of watching. It is in such silence that I find my thoughts wandering, uninvited, to the places I once swore I had forgotten. If you are listening, perhaps you have come seeking stories of glory, poor tragedy. You may find neither. What you will find, I suspect, are fragments of a life lived in shadows, caught between two worlds, muggle and magical light and dark, love and loss. I was born Severus Tobias Snape, a name that even now feels heavy. My father, Tobias Snape, was a muggle of little patience and even less kindness. My mother, Eileen Prince, was a witch, proud, intelligent, and, I think, deeply lonely. From her, I inherited what little magic there was in my veins, and the name Prince, which I would later claim as my own. The house in which I grew up stood on the edge of a town that had forgotten the meaning of joy. Spinner's End, they called it. Rows of dark, narrow houses, their chimneys coughing out smoke like tired dragons. The river nearby was thick with soot, and the air carried the faint tang of iron. It was not the sort of place where a child learned to dream. But even there, in the cracks of that grey world, magic found a way to breathe. My earliest memory of it is small, a thread of light twisting through my fingers as I tried to fix a torn page in one of my mother's spell books. I must have been 6, perhaps 7. My mother's eyes, usually dull with exhaustion, brightened for a moment when she saw it. "Tell you, Habit," she whispered, as though she had not dared to hope. It was the first time I felt I belonged to something beyond the walls of that house. My father did not share her joy. He feared what he could not understand, and I learned early that silence was a shield. I kept my secrets, and in the evenings, when he drank and cursed the world, I would slip away to the small attic and read my mother's old school books by candlelight. Potions, charms, hexes, it did not matter, borrowed them all. There, among dusty pages and broken bottles, the foundation of the Half-Blood Prince was laid, but I did not yet know the meaning of that name. Not until years later, I remember the summer when I first saw her, a girl with hair the color of autumn leaves, and eyes so green they seemed to hold the reflection of life itself. Lily Evans. She was playing near the edge of the river, laughing with her sister. I watched from a distance, afraid to be seen, but unable to look away. It was the first time I had seen someone perform magic other than myself. She made a flower bloom in her hand, simple, innocent, beautiful. When I finally gathered the courage to speak to her, she did not recoil. She asked questions. She listened, and for a boy like me, awkward, sharp-tongued, and far too serious for his age, that was everything. Lily was light, and I, even then, was a creature of shadow drawn helplessly toward it. We would meet in secret, away from her disapproving sister, and talk about Hogwarts, the school we had both read about in books but had never seen. She wanted to know everything, and I told her what I could. I spoke of potions and charms, of hidden corridors and enchanted ceilings. I promised her that we would both go there, that it would be a place where people like us could finally belong. When the letter came, sealed with the crest of Hogwarts, I thought the world had changed. In a way, it had. The first time I saw the castle rising above the lake, lit by torches and moonlight, I felt something deep within me stir, or perhaps, or a sense of destiny. Hogwarts was not merely a school. It was a sanctuary, a world away from Spinner's End, from shouting and broken glass. I was sorted into Lily, into Gryffindor. From that moment, the world that had seemed so close began to drift apart. But in the beginning, it did not matter. We still found each other in the library, in quiet corners of the courtyard. We talked of spells, of dreams, of the future. She teased me for being too serious, and I teased her for being too kind. It was the happiest I have ever been. It was also the beginning of everything that would later come undone in Slytherin. I found ambition and cunning, yes, but also cruelty. Many of my housemates were the sons and daughters of old wizarding families, proud of their lineage and disdainful of anything less. With my muggle father and threadbare robes, was tolerated but never truly accepted. So I turned inward. I studied harder than anyone else, brewed potions in secret, tested spells I had created myself, and wrote everything down in a small, battered notebook. That notebook would later become my most trusted companion, filled with observations, improvements, and inventions. It was in those pages that the name first appeared, the Half-Blood Prince, a name born of rebellion, of defiance. I was not ashamed of my mother's blood, nor did I wish to honor my father's. So I forged a new identity, one that belonged to me alone. Sometimes, when I look back, I wonder if that was where it all began. The division of the self. Severus Snape, the boy who sought belonging, and the Half-Blood Prince, who sought power. Two sides of the same coin, forever at war. The castle slept on, unaware of the quiet alchemy happening in its depths. A boy transforming pain into purpose, loneliness into ambition. And yet, even then, in the flicker of candlelight and ink-stained fingers, I still thought of her. Lily. Her laughter would echo down the halls, of my memory long after it had faded from the air. But for now, let us linger a moment longer in that stillness, the hush before the storm, when everything is possible and nothing yet broken. Listen for rain against the dungeon walls, the quiet crackle of a dying fire, the soft rustle of pages turning in an old book. That is where my story begins. The older students used to say that Hogwarts had moods that the castle itself could sense, the hearts of those who lived within it. Some nights the corridors felt alive with whispers. Others, they were cold, indifferent, watching you from the dark corners between torches. In those early years, I learned to walk those corridors silently, as if I were a shadow cast by someone else's life. While others laughed in the great hall, I memorized incantations. While they played Quidditch, I studied the subtle art of transfiguration, of potion making, of spells that were too old or too forbidden to be found in the syllabus. Knowledge was power, and power was safety. It was Lily who stopped them. She defended me, shouted at them, and for a moment I felt that familiar ache of gratitude and shame intertwine. But humiliation has a way of poisoning the tongue. In my anger, I said it, that word, mud-blood. Even now, after all the years, the sound of it burns. It was not merely a word, it was the shattering of something precious. The look in her eyes when she turned away haunts me more than any curse I've ever cast. I tried to apologize. She refused to listen, and though we shared the same castle, the same hallways, we became strangers. It is strange, isn't it, how a single moment can define the rest of your life. From then on, I threw myself fully into my studies, not for knowledge, but for escape. I spent hours in the library, in the dungeons, in forgotten classrooms filled with dust and echo. The more isolated I became, the stronger the voice within me grew, the one that whispered of greatness, of revenge, of destiny. The Dark Lord's influence reached even the walls of Hogwarts. Rumor spread of followers marked by devotion, of power granted through loyalty. To some, he was a savior of wizardkin. To others, a threat. To me, he was. Possibility that the thought shames me now. But then, as a boy starved of respect, it was intoxicating. He promised a world where lineage did not determine worth, where skill and loyalty could earn you a place among the powerful. I did not see that it was a lie. By the time I graduated from Hogwarts, the war had already begun, and like many who sought to prove themselves, I joined the ranks of the Death Eaters. But even then, in the depths of that darkness, her face would haunt me. Lily, she married him. James Potter, the man who had once dangled me upside down. The irony of it was not lost on me. I told myself I no longer cared. I told myself that love had been replaced by purpose, that I had transcended weakness, but I was wrong. Love does not vanish. It burrows deep, hiding beneath layers of pride and bitterness, whispering in the quiet moments. It is the soft ache that no amount of darkness can silence. When the prophecy was spoken, when I heard the words that would seal all our fates, I did what I thought was loyalty. I carried the message to my master, and by doing so, I doomed her. There are nights when I still hear her voice, faint, like wind through an open window. There are moments when the candle flickers just so, and I imagine her standing there, forgiving. But forgiveness is not for me. You see, I am not a hero. I am a man who made choices, each one carving away a piece of what might have been in the years that followed. I would try to make amends in my own way, through silence, through sacrifice, but that is a tale for another night. For now, I will let the memories rest. The dungeon grows colder, and the fire has nearly gone out. The potion on my desk simmers softly, its color shifting between emerald and shadow. A fitting reflection, I think, of what I have become. The boy who loved, the man who betrayed, the half-blood prince. And yet, in some small corner of my heart, untouched by time or regret, she still smiles. The rain continues to fall, steady and patient. Sleep now, if you can, for memory is a potion of its own, best sipped slowly, lest it burn. There is a silence that follows ruin, not the sharp silence of shock, but the heavy, aching kind, the kind that seeps into the bones and lingers, long after the screams have faded. That was the silence I lived in after her death. But to understand how it came to that, we must go back to when the mark was still fresh upon my arm, and the world had begun to fracture under the weight of fear, when I first knelt before the Dark Lord. It was not hatred that drove me, it was something smaller, and perhaps more dangerous, the desire to belong. He looked into me, and saw what I had spent a lifetime hiding. My resentment, my brilliance, my hunger to be seen. And he smiled. It is a terrible thing, to be recognized by evil, and to feel grateful for it. I told myself it was for knowledge, for purpose. I convinced myself that the world we would build would be better, that wizards like me, half-blood and overlooked, would finally find respect. But the Dark Lord's respect is not earned through worth. It is bought with obedience. In his service, I learned spells that should never be spoken, brewed poisons that should never be touched. I saw what magic could do when stripped of mercy, and still. I stayed, until one night, one prophecy, at whisper in a darkened room at the Hogshead Inn. A woman with eyes clouded in trance. Words about a child who would have the power to defeat the Dark Lord. I was there by accident, or fate, or cruelty. I heard only fragments, but I carried them back to him, eager, foolish, desperate to prove my worth. He listened, and he decided. The child was to die. I did not know who it was until it was too late. Until I heard her name, Lily Potter. That was the moment the mask cracked. All the years of bitterness, pride, and anger fell away, and what remained was simple terror. For the first time in my life, I begged. I went to him, the Dark Lord himself, and pleaded. I asked him to spare her, not her husband, not the child, only her. I offered him anything. He agreed to consider it, but mercy was never in his nature. And so, when he went to Godric's Hollow, she stood between him and the child, and he killed her that night. Something in me died as well. I remember going to Dumbledore, the only man who could have hated me enough to listen. I remember his face when I told him what I had done. I remember falling to my knees. Hide them, I said. Save her. And he did try, but it was already too late. I do not know what he saw in me that night. Perhaps a broken weapon that could still be turned toward good. Perhaps only a man whose guilt could be useful. But he offered me something I never expected. Then make her death mean something, he said, and so I did. I turned against the Dark Lord, against everything I had once sworn to serve. I became a spy, a double agent, a creature living between lies. It was not redemption. Redemption is to clean a word for what I became. It was penance, Every day thereafter was an act of atonement, not for forgiveness, but for purpose. Dumbledore trusted me. He saw through the bitterness, through the cruelty, perhaps because he knew it for what it was. Armor, he asked much of me, more than most could bear, but I obeyed, because obedience was the only thing left I understood. Years passed. The war ended. The Dark Lord fell, and still I lived. When I returned to Hogwarts as a teacher, it was not by choice. Dumbledore insisted. The castle will give you structure, he said, and perhaps, in teaching, you will find peace. Peace, a foolish notion. I taught potions, the one thing that still made sense. Pi demanded perfection. I punished mistakes. I made students fear me, because fear is easier to command than respect. They saw a cruel man, bitter man. They were not wrong. But at night, when the corridors were empty and the cauldrons cold, I would sit alone and think of her, of the life she never had, of the boy she left behind, Harry Potter. He looked so much like his father that it was almost unbearable. Every sneer, every flick of his messy hair, a reminder of everything I despised. And yet, his eyes, her eyes. Dumbledore once told me that the eyes are the last truth of a person. Perhaps that is why I could never truly hate the boy. He was the living embodiment of everything. I lost, so I watched him from a distance, harshly, coldly, guarding him without ever letting him know. Plea. It was easier that way. People often mistake cruelty for indifference, but sometimes cruelty is the only way to protect what you cannot bear to lose again. I brewed potions, graded essays, lived quietly within the rhythm of the castle. Students came and went. Years turned like pages, and all the while the storm outside gathered strength once more. The Dark Lord would rise again. But it was inevitable. Evil, like memory, has a way of returning. And when he did, I was already waiting. I took up my old mask, donned my old robes, and returned to his side, not as servant, but as shadow. Leave me loyal. Dumbledore believed me faithful, and so began the long years of living between two truths, each one consuming the other. There is a kind of madness in deceit. Begin to lose track of which face belongs to which lie. At times, even I wondered which of the two men I truly was. The Death Eater, the spy, the teacher, or simply the ghost of a boy from Spinner's End who once loved too deeply. But the choice no longer mattered. Only the mission did. Protect the boy, keep the secret, wait for the end. That was my life, and it was enough. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I would imagine a different world. A world where she had lived, where I had chosen differently. Perhaps we would have met in Diagon Alley by chance. Years later, she would smile politely, perhaps even forgive me. We would speak of old times, of Hogwarts, of simpler days, and then she would leave, and I would return to my solitude, but lighter. Somehow, fantasies are cruel things. They give shape to what cannot be, so I buried them, as I buried everything. and I waited for the day when my purpose would be fulfilled. Bind, I could finally rest. That day would come sooner than I expected. But for now, let the story pause here. The potion cools, the rain softens, and the castle sighs in its sleep. Close your eyes, let the dungeons fade into quiet mist, for even shadows must rest between confessions. Tomorrow, perhaps, I shall tell you how it ended. The return of the Dark Lord was not marked by thunder, nor lightning, nor prophecy. This time, it came in whispers, in the sudden stillness before the storm, in names that vanished from the daily prophet, in shadows that stretched longer than they should. When he rose again, it was as though the years between had been an illusion, a breath between heartbeats, and I, ever the survivor, returned to his side. He believed me faithful still, my place among his followers restored, my mark burning once more upon my arm. But I was not the same man he remembered. Beneath the black robes and measured words, I carried a secret purpose, Dumbledore's purpose, to protect the boy, to protect Potter, not for his sake, but for hers. The castle once again became both refuge and prison. I taught, I spied, I reported, I deceived to the Death Eaters. I was loyal to Dumbledore. I was indispensable to myself. I was neither. There was no truth left to cling to, only duty. When Narcissa Malfoy came to me that night, pale and trembling, I knew the path ahead had narrowed to its end. She spoke of her son, Draco, and the task the Dark Lord had given him to kill Dumbledore. Punishment disguised as honor. She begged me to help him, and I did what I always did. I obeyed Bellatrix, ever watchful, demanded proof of loyalty. And so the vow was made, the unbreakable vow. If Draco failed, I would complete the task myself. I remembered Dumbledore's eyes when I told him. He did not flinch, nor tremble. He only sighed. Then it must be so, he said quietly. When the time comes, Severus, you will do what must be done. I protested, though not loudly. He was already dying, his hand cursed beyond healing. He spoke of mercy, of sparing Draco, of ending his own pain. But I knew there was more. There is always more with Albus Dumbledore. You must protect them all, he said. The boy most of all. When the Dark Lord returns, he must trust you completely. That will be the only way. And so I agreed, not out of faith, but necessity. It was not the first time Dumbledore had asked me to do the unthinkable. From that night on, my steps echoed differently through the halls of Hogwarts. I was no longer merely a teacher, nor spy, nor man. I had become a promise. I remember the night of the tower. The air was thick with rain and fear. The dark mark glowed above the castle, a cruel imitation of hope. Draco stood there, wand shaking, face pale. He could not do it, and in that hesitation I saw the reflection of my own past, a boy who wanted to belong, and the cost of obedience. Then I climbed the stairs, and I met Dumbledore's gaze. There was no anger there, only acceptance, perhaps even relief. He spoke my name softly. Severus, please, And so I did. The green light filled the tower, and the world fell silent. In that instant, I ceased to be a man. I became the monster they needed. The days that followed were chaos. The castle mourned. The Dark Lord celebrated, and I played my part, headmaster of Hogwarts, a title that meant nothing. Students looked at me with hatred. Teachers whispered. I did not blame them. They could not know the truth. I walked the halls like a ghost, enforcing rules I despised, punishing those I secretly protected. Each day was a balancing act between survival and collapse, and still, the boy, Harry, remained unaware. He hated me as I expected him to. It was safer that way. I fed the Dark Lord what he wished to hear, carefully measured truths wrapped in lies. Every secret I gave him was already known to Dumbledore's portrait. Every life I saved was credited to luck, but luck had little to do with it. I watched from the shadows as the boy grew reckless, stubborn, brave. He reminded me so much of her that sometimes I had to turn away. And yet, even as I kept him safe, he stood against me. He would never understand, not until the very end. The final battle came like a storm breaking over the castle, wild, unrelenting, inevitable. I had known it would come, but knowing did not make it easier to face. The Dark Lord demanded the Elder Wand, the wand that had once been Dumbledore's. He believed it should obey him, but one, like people, have their own loyalties. He came to me then, suspicion in his eyes. He thought that by killing me, the wand would transfer its allegiance. How ironic, in those last moments, as the serpent struck, pain and clarity arrived together. I saw her again, Lily, not as memory, but as light, and I knew it was time. Potter appeared too late, yet just in time. With what little strength remained, I gave him the memories, my truth, my purpose, my burden. Look at me, I said, because in his eyes, her eyes, I found peace. There are those who will call me hero. Others will remember me as villain. Both are wrong. I was simply human, flawed, frightened, and in love with a ghost. I do not know what awaits beyond the veil, but if she is there, perhaps, for a moment, she will forgive me, and that will be enough. Now the dungeon grows still again. The cauldron has cooled. Outside. The storm has passed. If you are still awake, listener, remember this. Not all stories end in glory. Some end in quiet understanding, in acceptance. The Half-Blood Prince was never meant to be remembered as legend, only as a man who tried and failed and tried again. Sleep now, dream softly, for even in darkness, there is always one flicker of light that refuses to fade. There are no clocks here, no ticking of time, no echo of footsteps, no whisper of turning pages, only stillness, vast and endless, like the space between breaths. I cannot tell you when I awoke here, or if I awoke at all. Perhaps death is not waking, but remembering. The world I left behind feels distant now, like a dream glimpsed through fog. The sounds of battle, decries, the spells, they have faded into a single, long exhale for the first time in years. There is peace. It is strange, the absence of weight. The body, with all its scars and fatigue, is gone. What remains is thought, memory, light. I see, but not as I knew it. The stones shine brighter, the air hums softly. By, and every corridor breathes warmth. The castle is alive again, untouched by war. Students laugh in the courtyards. Candles float gently in the great hall, and in the potions classroom, my old dungeon, a new teacher stands before rows of eager faces. The shelves are tidier. Now dot the walls less forbidding. Someone polish the old cauldrons. On my desk still mine. Though I no longer sit there, rests a single small bottle. No label, no dust dot inside. A silver liquid swirls my last memory. Perhaps, occasionally, a curious student dares to open it. They peer inside, and for a fleeting moment, they see glimpses of who I was. Not the tyrant, not the savior, just the man. And then they close it, and the whisper fades. That is enough. Sometimes I wonder if one can wander in a place without form to the edge of the lake. It is the same, yet not. The water gleams like glass. The trees lean in, listening. There I see them. Lily, James, Sirius, even his eyes still twinkling with that infuriating calm. They stand together, not as ghosts, but as echoes of light. Lily turns to me. Her expression is neither sorrow nor reproach, only quiet understanding. For a long moment, neither of us speaks. There is no need. Words are for the living. I feel something uncoil within me, a tension I have carried since childhood, loosening, dissolving. She smiles, and it is enough. I often wonder how the boy, the man, Pardnow remembers me. Harry Potter, he bears my memories, my truth. He knows everything I could never say. Does he hate me still? Does he pity me? It no longer matters. I have seen him once or twice, standing before my portrait in the headmaster's office. He does not speak. He simply stands there, eyes thoughtful, head bowed slightly. Then, without a word, he leaves a small white lily on the desk. That is more than forgiveness. That is remembrance. And that, too, is enough. Sometimes I hear faint laughter, the kind that used to drift down from the Gryffindor table. Sometimes I imagine walking the castle as I once did, robes billowing, students scurrying aside, the faint sound of quills scratching hurriedly over parchment. For all my bitterness, I loved that castle. Its walls held my life, my sins, my redemption. Every potion brewed, every spell whispered, every tear shed in solitude. It all remains there, woven into the stone. Hogwarts remembers us all, even those who never ask to be remembered. There are moments, brief, shimmering, when I see beyond Hogwarts, the world moves on. Children who never knew my name carry wands and dreams, unaware of the lives that made their peace possible. The wizarding world rebuilds, old wounds close, new stories begin. Perhaps that is the truest kind of immortality, not statues or songs, but quiet continuation. To have one's mistakes turned into lessons, one's pain into understanding, the boy I once was. The lonely child at Spinner's End could never have imagined such a thing. Pre-wanted greatness, power, acknowledgement. But in the end, all he found was truth. And the truth is this: love, however brief, redeems all things. Sometimes I think of my mother, Eileen Prince, the name I once used to hide from the world. She would be proud, perhaps, to know that her son's name is whispered now, not with fear, but with reverence. And my father, well, some ghosts are better left unremembered, yet even he, in his own way, shaped what I became. The bitterness, the longing, the drive to prove myself. Pain, too, can be a teacher. We are all, in the end, alchemists of our own suffering, turning lead into light, if we dare. Bearers, one more thing I must confess, before the memory fades completely. I used to believe that love was weakness, that it blinded judgment, clouded reason. But I was wrong. Love is the purest form of magic there is. It is not bound by blood, nor wand, nor time. It is the one spell that survives death. Dumbledore knew it. Lily embodied it. And in the end, even I, stubborn, bitter, foolish, understood it. That understanding, perhaps, is what allows me to rest. If you are still awake, listening, perhaps you too have known loss. Perhaps you too have carried guilt like a shadow that will not lift. If so, remember this: it is never too late to change the shape of your story. Regret is not the end. It is the beginning of wisdom. Close your eyes now. Imagine the castle, the glow of its windows, the calm of its halls, the gentle hum of magic that never truly fades. Hear the rain against the stones, the soft sigh of the lake, the whisper of a voice that once was harsh, now softened by time. Always. That word, small, simple, carries everything I ever was. A promise, a plea, a truth that endures. And now the dungeon is quiet again. The candlelight flickers once more, and somewhere, far beyond all this, I think I hear her laughter. The half-blood prince has told his story, and at last he sleeps.